What's up, my good friends? Again, you see me here in my classroom during my planning period where I am tired and recording a video to stay awake. So, today I'm going to talk about all the books I read in 2021 that revolve around the American Civil War. Now, I read a lot of these books, and I read them because I began working on my own novel about the Civil War, so I guess you can say this was preliminary reading, research, whatever. There are mostly fiction books in here, but most of the nonfiction books I read are about the Civil War. So, the first book I read about the Civil War, I read in one sitting, and that is Across Five Aprils. I've ranted about this book. I think it should be banned from school libraries and school classrooms because of pedophilia, and it's absolutely creepy and disgusting, and I hate it. The short thing about book banning, I get a lot of hate for this, but um, I know better than to be scared of stories, but children don't always. So, banning books in schools and in libraries and school libraries and challenging them, keeping them out of curriculum is not really a problem for me. Eliminating them from the free market is. So if kids want to read a book, they go home, they buy it off Amazon, mom and dad buy it for them. That's none of my business. But keeping pedophilic content out of curriculum for children is my responsibility as an adult. Okay, and the next book I read was probably the most boring book I read all year, and that is The Red Badge of Courage. I remember almost nothing about this book. It's a classic, and it was just boring. I don't know what else to say about it. The only scene I really remember is the kid, the main character, walking into the church to a church and finding a dead body that ants are eating. So, and so the next book I read is actually one of one of my favorite books I read all year, and that is Cold Mountain. Now, this book was very literary, obviously, it won a Pulitzer Prize. It's about a delusional Confederate soldier trying to make his way back to his love in a town called Cold Mountain in North Carolina. He's a deserter. Desertion was a big problem for the Confederate Army towards the end of the war. And at this time, the battle he escapes from is called Petersburg. And this was a siege, it was trench warfare, and it was essentially the dress rehearsal for World War II. Now, you may have seen the movie. The movie was great. It's incredibly well adapted, but it adds a whole lot to the story. There really aren't any battle scenes in Cold Mountain um, in the book, and the just completely authentic music that goes in with the movie. I would actually recommend watching the movie first and then reading the book. Um, because chances are a lot of kind of normal historical fiction readers might not be able to make it through the book just because it is so literary. It is a little bit cumbersome, but it's just absolutely thrilling. The main character, Inman, we actually don't get his first name because Charles Frazier just puts us so far into his head, and it's just completely enthralling, just the thoughts that these characters have about each other. A lot of things that appear in the movie are mentioned in the book, but we don't get that three-dimensional experience of having the costumes and the background and the music to go along with it. So I definitely recommend seeing the movie before reading the book. I will say they are equally as good, but the book is not an easy read. So next is All right, Blaze of Glory. This is about the Battle of Shiloh, and I wouldn't really call this a historical fiction book. It's more of a dramatization of the Battle of Shiloh. Don't recommend it. Gave it 2 stars. Boring AF. Moving on. The next book I read about the Civil War is Diary of a Tar Heel Confederate Soldier by Leon Lewis. This is his personal diary of a Confederate private, and those are quite rare because so many foot soldiers just couldn't read at this time. And this is probably the most important book I've read um, about the Civil War. Probably the most important book I've ever read about the Civil War. It shows how many and how much these average, everyday foot soldiers just cared about slavery, how racist they were. And at the end of the war, Leon Lewis is actually in a Union prison. He's imprisoned by the American Army, and there are some black guards there, and they're playing around, and one of them accidentally fires. He didn't know his gun was loaded, and he kills another Union black soldier. And the Confederate soldier is like, "Yay, thank God!" And he calls them black devils, and he is just so incredibly racist. And I was personally happy to see that because people need to know how just terrible these Confederate soldiers were and what they were truly fighting for. They were fighting for slavery. I mean, I know every boy had their own reason for fighting, but at the end of the day, if they had won the war, we might still have slaves. And that's wrong. Next is, I think, equally as important, but in an opposite way. It's A Rebel in Pickett's Charge. This was written in the 20s, during the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, when all the Confederate monuments that are thankfully coming down started to go up. So I would say read this either before or after you read Diary of a Tar Heel Confederate Soldier, because you need to read both of them. Because Leon Lewis's book shows the truth, and A Rebel in Pickett's Charge shows the lie. This was just neo-Confederate propaganda, and it's important. And we need to see the reason these monuments went up, the reason the KKK rose, the reason that Southerners, a lot of them have so much pride in the Confederate Army. It stems from this, but they don't know the true narrative around it. So I definitely recommend that if you are interested in the American Civil War. All right. So the next book I read about the Civil War is, all right, Sunflower Sisters, historical fiction. It's a family saga, not too enthralling, boring, flat characters, not much to say, don't recommend. Um, Evidently it's like the third in a series, but it's a prequel. So there was one about World War II and then World War One, and then these are the ancestors of the characters that appear in the other series. Not much to say about it, don't really like it. All right, so the next I read is, I think this is a children's book. It's called The Boys' War, and it shows the young kids who fought for both sides of the army. It has some really cool pictures in it, really cool illustrations, but I don't know. Just as an adult reader, not great. It's. I think it would be great to have in elementary school classroom libraries. Very much so. All right. The last book I read about the Civil War last year is Rebel Private Front and Rear. This is a memoir written after the war. It was disappointing in some ways, but kind of enlightening in others. So, this boy who wrote this book was actually from Texas, very near where I live, a little bit further south. There were a lot of plantations in central Texas, lots of German plantations with slaves. And the man who wrote this book, this boy, his father was actually um, an overseer of the slaves, so I guess you could call him like their manager or something. But what was really disappointing is he never really talked about what he thought of slavery. So he was one of those boys who it seems just went out and joined the army to have something to do. I mean, imagine how boring their lives would have been at this time. But again, like I say, he was on the wrong side. And it was cool to see. He talks a whole lot about the medical aspects of the Civil War, how horrifying medicine was at that time, and it just sends a chill up your spine to think about, like, no anesthesia and sawing off limbs and going through mumps and measles and diseases spreading through those hospitals without anything to take the pain away except whiskey and laudanum. And ugh, it's just I've got the creeps because it is so painful. But he relays his experiences very well, but he never talks about what he thought about slavery, which was disappointing. But he gives us a lot of details about the battles and the psychological effects, and that part of it was good. Do I recommend this book? Yeah, sure, if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But again, he doesn't really speak about slavery, so it is a little disappointing. But that's all I have for you today. So keep reading, keep writing, keep loving words, and I will see you next time. Bye.